to turn off your video if you prefer not to be recorded. So, welcome everyone to our third webinar of our winter webinar series this year, focusing on topics to help communities take action for wildlife. The topics have been chosen based on conversations that we've been having with communities. So we hope they'll be useful, but we do welcome any feedback and any ideas for future sessions that you'd like to see. So my name is Katie Wilkinson and I'm the Wilder Communities Team Leader at Devon Wildlife Trust. We've also got Hetty Lewis, our Wilder Communities Officer. She's working behind the scenes, getting all your questions together and things like that. And we also have Emma Smith, who will be actually taking over from Hetty as Hetty goes on maternity leave soon. So this evening we're going to look at surveying and monitoring wildlife in your community. And we've got a couple of people to talk to us tonight. I'll first give you some top tips on how to engage in your local community surveying, and it really will be quick top tips. And then Jack Rivers will come in next. And so Jack is a project assistant working on a number of community ecology projects for the Devon Biodiversity Records Centre, which is one of a national network of local environmental record centres in the UK and has been providing information about wildlife for more than 20 years. DBRC collect and manage local records of wildlife species, habitats and geological sites and lead on the County Wildlife Sites programme for Devon. And they're very much a part of Devon Wildlife Trust as well. And finally, Jo Pullin. So Jo is involved with the community group Sustainable Hatherley. She'll be talking about the surveying and monitoring of wildlife that they've been doing as a group in their local community, including how they've used this as a tool to link with the wider community, such as the school and the churchyard. So those are our two really great speakers with lots of knowledge. Some of you may also know Jo from the Conservation Communities Project in North Devon as well. Just putting that out there, you might already recognise her face. So before I start, we've got a super quick poll that we'd like you to take part in, which should pop up on your screen any second now. And the question is, how confident are you at surveying or monitoring wildlife in your community? So are you super confident? So you've established surveys of monitoring in your community already. Are you confident? So you've surveyed some areas in your community. You're not that confident, so you'd like to survey wildlife but not sure how to go about it. Or survey wildlife, we don't know a sparrow from a starling. So just, yeah, click on the one that represents you. And I will try and share those results, although it's not doing that. It's not giving me the option. Oh no, it has. There we go. Has that shared? Can you all see that? Anyway, many of you, so 25 of you, are not that confident. So you'd like to survey, but you're not sure how to go about it. 6 of you are confident, so you've done some surveying, and then 1 of you is super confident. So yeah, so I think hopefully the majority of you are in the right place, and hopefully we can help you tonight. So I'm going to stop sharing that. And then I'm going to just dive into my presentation. Just going to sort out my screen a moment. Hold on. There we go. Is that better? No, sorry, hold on. I just need to change my view. Let's put that up there. Okay, fiddly stuff, this Zoom. Okay. Hopefully it's going to behave. There we go. Right, okay, top tips. So first top tip is to make it EAST, and EAST stands for easy, attractive, sociable, and timely. So it kind of does what it says on the tin, really. So, you know, make what you're doing super easy, make it something attractive, perhaps fun and sociable that people would like to take part in. And then also, you know, think about the timing of when you're going to do something like, I don't know, do a survey event or a BioBlitz. You know, perhaps don't do it over, I don't know, a bank holiday where you know everyone will be going on holiday, for example. So yeah, make it easy, attractive, sociable, and timely. Tell people what you're doing and why. So that's really important. So what's the purpose of collecting the data? So, you know, are you collecting data to purely just to engage lots of people in your community? Are you collecting it to help protect the environment in your community? Or do you know, or do you want to know what's there first, so you know what you want to do to improve it for the future? You know, is it part of a bigger plan, for instance? So, you know, that communication is really important for people to understand, like, you know, the importance of what you're doing. Are you going to hold regular sessions of surveying and have almost like a, I don't know, like a program of when you're going to survey through the year? Or are you going to have one-off events? So perhaps you just want to do one thing, a big BioBlitz, and that'll be that for the year. Or it might be a mixture of both. So you might do some bigger events followed by some regular monitoring that just happens throughout the year. So, you know, for instance, if you're monitoring your local water course, so your brook or your stream, you'll probably need to like train up people and have kind of like a regular monitoring. So it really does depend on what you're doing, really. And, you know, often there needs to be a process to follow on from gathering the data and using the data as well. So something to think about there as well. One-off events can include BioBlitzes. They're often over whole weekends, BioBlitzes, and usually it's a race to find as many species as possible within sort of like 48 hours in a certain area. Or you can look at like national survey days, such as Big Garden Bird Watch, or the Big Schools Bird Watch, or the Big Butterfly Count, or, you know, bat weekends. And there's others too, and I'll share some a calendar from the Natural History Museum that actually plots all of those out, which is really good. So thinking about whether you want to focus on a particular species to begin with, or a particular space in your community. So for instance, you know, do you want to focus on swifts, or do you want to focus on hedgehogs or frogs? If so, you know, put all your efforts into monitoring that one thing. And actually sometimes, particularly if you're beginning, you know, starting out, it's much easier to get people interested in one animal that you're surveying, or, you know, one tree, or, you know, whatever it is, because surveying lots of wildlife can be outside of people's comfort zones. So I guess it's sort of, you know, starting small and building up from there. But also you can do lots of different species at the same time if you so wish. It's completely up to you. Do you want to focus on an area in your community? So, for example, do you want to survey a playing field that seems devoid of wildlife, and you want to collect what we call baseline data? So that will show you what you've got now, and then once you've made improvements on the space, you can look back at your baseline data after you've surveyed it again, and then see how you've improved it. And baseline data will also tell you if there's anything significant to be aware of in terms of species as well. You might also want to think about historical data that can feed into your baseline data. So databases such as, you know, Devon Biological Records Centre hold, or National Biological Network Atlas, I think it's called, or something like the Hedgehog Street website, which will show you, all the hedgehogs in your area, for instance, or all the hedgehogs that have been recorded anyway. Or, are you going to look at it as a whole project to get people interested and build momentum? So if you want to, for instance, if you want to develop a hedgehog highway, then perhaps you need to survey where all the hedgehogs are in your village or in your street, for instance, and mapping them out. Are there any hotspots? Are there danger spots, for crossing roads for hedgehogs, etc., etc.? And then you can tell your community about local hedgehogs and sort of build up a kind of well-rounded picture of that one thing. And don't forget about sending on your records. That's really important. And I'm sure Jack will talk more about that. So sending records to Devon Biological Records Centre as well. So those are just a few top tips, really. I'm sure Jack and Joe will input more or build on what I've said as well. So this is the Natural History Museum calendar. You can find this online. Hetty will pop the link in the chat. I thought this was really useful. It's colourful, which is always good. But for me, this works for my brain. It might not for you, but it just sets out the different surveys that happen through the year and the benefits of joining these surveys that are run by different organisations is that often they'll have ways to verify your records. There'll be resources that you can use, like ID guides, information on how to actually do the survey. So, and sometimes even they put on local training. So it's really useful just to have a look through these and see if there's any that take your fancy, and just have a go. They're really useful as a really nice starting block. Couple of shouts out to Natural History Museum. Actually, they've got some really good guides. They've got a really good guide on running a BioBlitz as well, which Hetty will put the link in for. And they've also got a detailed guide on community green space surveys as well. So yeah, really good resources on their web pages. So do have a look. But I'm sure Joe and Jack will also tell you about other resources. So that was just the other end of the calendar, basically. What else? Yeah, just a final thought, really, to keeping people engaged. So, particularly if you have got this bigger project going on, or you just want to, keep people engaged in what you're doing in your community, it's really important just to update people what you're doing, what's happened to the records and, how that's influencing the project going forward. So, and you can do that through different things, so social media or local news bulletins or e-newses, school magazines, or, even just updates in the village hall poster, something like that. However your community really get that information, then use it. Yeah, like I said, tell people how their records have been used. Perhaps think about having those regular opportunities through the year for people to get involved at different times of the day, not just doing it during the week, making sure that there's weekends and evenings that people can join in. Are there things that people can do at home in between all the surveying? So could they, monitor stuff in their back garden, which makes it really easy? So going back to those East principles, could you have a competition? See who could, collect the most records. You can be really creative with these kind of things to keep people, engaged with what you're doing. Make it fun, make it sociable. You want people to come back and to come back and be involved in what you're doing. So yeah, be creative. And just a quick one on resources. So just to say, the Wilder Communities team, we have survey kits available for communities to borrow. So all you need to do is just email us and we can send you the list of what you can borrow. So there's things like pond nets and bug pots and identification guides. There's even bat detectors that you can borrow if you want to do a public walk in your community. So, you know, do pull on those resources. It's sitting there for you to use. So please do use that. Another thing, identification guides. So the Field Studies Council have some really great guides. They're pretty cheap to use, pretty robust as well, and waterproof, sort of yay size. And they're really good for beginning, for, you know, starting out, because it's not a intimidating massive book. You know, they're really simple guides that can get you started. And also we've got some really simple spotter sheets like the one pictured here on our Wildlife Watch website, which again, Hetty will put the link to the website in there. Some organisations give away free guides as well, or free kit, so it's worth visiting, you know, those links to different organisations. And you can also put a call out for local amateur professionals in your local area. You know, there might be a local ecologist living in your street that wouldn't mind getting involved. So, you know, put a shout out to ask for those expertise. And, you know, if you need money to buy kits, or, you know, have your own kit, then, you know, think about going to your local businesses or going to places like Tesco and having the bags for help funding, or Co-op do really great pots of funding for communities. So that was a very quick run through. Do get in touch with the Wild Communities team if you think we can help. But now I will hand over to Jack, who will talk to you more about his work at Devon Biological Records Centre. So I'll stop sharing. Over to you, Jack.
Great, thank you very much. Right, let's share the screen. Hopefully that's all working. Right, so I'm Jack from the DBRC. So I'm part of the field team. So I get involved with a lot of botanical surveys, but I also lead on a lot of our community projects as well. So I've got a fair bit of experience working with community groups, and hopefully I'll share some of that with you this evening. So I thought I'd start just by giving a quick overview of the Devon Biodiversity Records Centre, although I think Katie's done a really good job of giving you a sort of brief look into it. But essentially, we're part of a wider network of local environmental record centres, which are all throughout the UK. And we've been recording wildlife in Devon for over 20 years now. So we're originally set up to act as a reference point for anyone who wants to know about wildlife within Devon. And therefore we collect, collate and manage a database of around 8.5 million records. And this is continually being added to. So I think it's around 2,000 to 5,000 records added each month. So that's a lot of records to go through. So these records come from a variety of sources. So they might come from our own surveys that we do, might be from individuals within the Wildlife Trust, local recording groups, or a lot of members of the public also submit records, and that's really vital to the work we do. So our data is used to inform planning and support the work of partner organisations such as Devon County Council or Natural England, and we do that by providing them with data services and the most up-to-date records on wildlife in Devon. However, we do also provide information to parish councils, local people, conservation bodies, and many others through our sort of data searches, licenses, and exchanges. So we're hosted by Devon Wildlife Trust and run on a not-for-profit basis, and we don't receive any central government funding. But that does mean that we do have to charge for our data search services, but we use that to support the maintenance of our database and try to improve our data holdings in the long run. But on top of all of that, we also have an incredibly skilled field team and technical team, and we're involved in a load of environmental projects across Devon, and that might be detailed botanical surveys, technical mapping of environment data, and involvement with a wide variety of community science projects. Now, that's enough on the DBRC for now, but if you do want to know more about our work and projects, then there's lots of information on our website. So Why is it important to monitor and record nature? So we all know that nature and wildlife is incredibly important and that it's vital we try to conserve it. However, how do we know where to start if we don't actually know what's there? And that's where recording comes in. So by making records on species and habitats, it means we can keep an eye on them. This allows us to observe changes in a variety of things, such as the distribution of populations, the number of individuals within them, and any factors that might be influencing their health. For example, by monitoring species over many, many years, we've seen a general shift northwards of species as the climate heats up. And that's as species try to find habitats that have a similar environmental condition to their original location. So this knowledge has then been used to draw attention to maintain vital habitats, look at links between habitats, and identify any other risks that species might face as they move throughout the landscape. Now, various groups and individuals collect data, which is incredibly useful, but we still end up with quite a few gaps in our knowledge throughout the landscape. And the heat map that's showing at the moment is actually the concentration of the records that DBRC holds. So the lighter areas are where we have more records. So essentially, they tend to be centered around higher population densities. And this isn't just something that we experience at a national level. Data also looks similar to this. So whether that's higher populations or quite active recording groups. But that's why it's important that more people get involved with recording to try and fill in those gaps and provide more information about your communities. So why is it important at a community level to record and monitor wildlife? Well, pretty much for exactly the same reason as the previous slide. So your local environments are part of the wider natural world, and therefore by recording and supporting local wildlife, you'll inadvertently be supporting the wider ecosystem, and it just helps to paint a much more detailed picture. So information collected by communities can help to inform management of local habitats, help inform increasing connectivity between sites, but also highlight whether there's any important species present within your local area. But it also has wider added benefits. So getting outside in nature, interacting with other people, all goes a long way in supporting our own mental health and developing connections with others. But also it's just a really fantastic opportunity to learn about different species and develop your own identification skills. So I've now given you a bit of a brief overview on the importance of recording, but how can you actually make a record and what are the key bits of information you need to make note of? Now, it's quite easy to just go over the simple steps, but I've tried to include reasons as to why you record specific things, as I just think that helps you remember it more and just provides a bit more context. So first up is, what is it that you saw? So if you want to build up an understanding of the wildlife present in your local community, then you need to make note of what's there. So you could pretty much record anything, whether that's plants, animals, fungi, lichen, or even wider habitats. So within ecology, we like to group organisms, and one of the main ways of doing this is through something called taxonomic rank. And that's essentially just a series of groupings based off of an ancestral hierarchy or how related one organism is to another. So ideally, we'll want to record something at the species level, as that will give you the most accurate account of the organism. However, not all species are easy to identify. And if you're new to biological recording, you might not be really confident in determining something down to species level. And therefore, you can describe it with a broader category. So for example, you might be surveying a woodland and you come across a tree. And if you're really confident, you might be able to say that it's a sessile oak. However, you might not be that confident, but you can say it's an oak quite confidently. So you could describe it as an oak instead. And even if you're not that confident, you could then look at other categories. So you might describe it as a broadleaf tree or a conifer tree. And these all provide value, with the more accurate having more value, but still, if you can get some sort of description, that's really useful. So ultimately, the more you observe and record, the better you will be at determining differences between species. And there's also multiple resources, which I'll discuss later, which can help you to identify different species. So I would also mention as well that it's still incredibly important to record common species that you come across, as these are often under-recorded. So people tend to make note of the rarer species, but maybe ignore the pigeon that's in your garden. So next up is, when did you see it? Typically, we'll record the date that you observed the organism, and this will help you to establish when the observation was made. And that's really important for understanding the temporal aspects of a record. So one thing it provides is seasonal context, as the species you observe may only have been recorded so in the summer, and even more detailed than that, it might only appear in August. It also provides annual context. So if there was a large drought that year, we can refer back to that. But it also allows us to track species over time, and that allows you to observe trends that you wouldn't necessarily be able to at a smaller time frame. So a classic example of that is the peppered moth in the UK, where there are essentially some really light coloured ones and some dark coloured ones. And during the Industrial Revolution, when soot became more prevalent within the environment, it tended to favour the darker coloured moths. So you saw less of the lighter coloured moths and more of the darker coloured moths. And by observing that change in population over time, you're able to extract that information and the impact. So you could also get really detailed and record the specific time that you observed something. And that can be useful if you're wanting to monitor a specific individual. So if you have a badger locally, they might have a routine, so you can find out about that. Next up is, where did you see it? So the location is really important, as then we know exactly where the observation was made. Now, to record this, you want to take some sort of geographic reference, whether that's grid reference, the latitude and longitude, what 3 words, or you could even write down an address and a description. Essentially, anything that allows us to pinpoint the location of a species provides really valuable spatial context. Now, there are various apps which you can use, but yeah, we can always provide links to those, I'm sure. So this can be used to map the range of species, which is essentially all the areas they occupy. And this could then be flagged up in any planning requests, which can be really useful. And a common example of that would be great crested newts, scuppering a development because they're recorded in a local pond. However, the information can also be incredibly useful for research and conservation, and it can help to highlight connectivity issues in a landscape. So you might find a butterfly in one area in your sort of parish, but not in another area. But then when you actually look at the wider landscape, you might see that there's issues with habitat connectivity. Next is, who recorded it? So it's really important to know who made the record, as that provides context to the level of accuracy of the record, but it also provides a frame of reference for anyone that might need more information. So it possibly sounds a bit harsh, but when verifying a record, you will be more confident if it was recorded by a professional versus an amateur. But that's not to say it would be wrong. And that's why if you submit records to your local record centres or recording groups, they will try and verify it to the best of their ability. And in the case of a particularly rare species, it's also quite useful, because if you're trying to relocate the area it was found, you could maybe get in contact with the individual that sent in the record. And also, you never know, you may even discover something, be able to name it, or at least be recorded as the person that found the sort of last example of a rare plant. So finally, with any record, you can always provide additional context that you deem useful. Now, this could include a range of things from the abundance, so whether there are multiple badgers, it could be the life stage, was it a sapling you observed or an ancient tree, environmental conditions, was it raining, was it sunny? Essentially any information that you think would be useful. And finally, I would always recommend taking photos, as that allows you to identify things at home or to provide it to someone else to help you with ID. So yeah, just to summarize the main things that you want to record. What is it? When did you see it? Where was it? Who recorded it? And essentially, what else can you tell me about that record? So next up, I'll just talk about identification basics. Now, the most surefire way to identify something is through DNA testing. However, I don't think any of us have easy access to that, and therefore we tend to rely on observable characteristics to identify species. But luckily, scientists have been doing that for years, so we have a pretty good understanding of how to do it. And therefore, we are really reliant on our senses to identify organisms. So first off, think about what can you see. With birds, it might be the coloration of their feathers that give them away. With plants, there may be some really specific shape to a seed or a leaf. And these are all things that you can identify by looking at them. But you may, if out birding, want to use binoculars, or with plants, it's really useful to have a hand lens. Next up is smell. That can be really useful. An example I always think of is blackcurrant. So it's an ancient woodland indicator. But when I first started surveying woodlands, I didn't expect to find a blackcurrant in a woodland. And so I thought, that looks like a blackcurrant. Smelt the leaf, smells like blackcurrant. It's probably blackcurrant. So smell can be really useful as well. Sound is less important with a lot of things, but really useful with birds. And also things like bats as well. And with some of you really posh detectors, they can ID the species based off of the sound alone. And there's also some really good apps now for bird call identification. And then touch can also be really useful. For example, if there's something that looks suspiciously like a nettle and you touch it and get stung, it's probably a nettle. And then finally, taste can be really useful as well, but also not always the best because things can be really toxic and deadly. But good example would be a plant called wood sorrel, which looks quite clover-like and is found in woodland areas, typically shady areas. That has quite an acidic, appley taste, and that can be really useful. Now, obviously, many of the sort of characteristics of species are well recorded, and we can refer back to those, but we all interpret the world differently. So I would really encourage that you sort of build up your own ways of identifying species. So one thing I always think of is there's a plant called scentless mayweed, and in the books well, it's related to chamomile. In the books it says it pretty much has no smell, but to me it still smells quite strongly of chamomile. So I've been caught out a few times misidentifying it. But now I remember that it does smell like chamomile. So definitely work out your own ways of identifying things. So when identifying species, it's really useful to have some help. So a really good thing is field guides and books. Now you can get really big chunky ones, and they're great to have at a desk. But in the field, you can get smaller ones. Katie mentioned the FSC guides. They're really brilliant, waterproof, lightweight, just really good all round. And you can find any of these guides online. Quite often find them in charity shops, bookshops, or you might have people like wider communities that will be able to lend you things. Recording apps as well now. AI is very on trend, and recording apps keep getting better with machine learning. So iNaturalist is a really good one, and that will do all sorts of species, where you simply take a picture of whatever you're observing, and it will provide recommendations. And you can also look and see if similar organisms were recorded by someone else in your area. Recording groups and record centres, these are really useful organisations. So, for example, I know Devon birds are quite active and really helpful. There's also the Devon fungus group, and they run fungal forays throughout the year. So you can go and learn with them, but you can also send in your records and they can help identify them for you. Also, local people. Us ecologists have to live somewhere, and you never know, we might live a few doors down from you. So see if you can make those connections. And then also look out for any events or projects that are going on around you, as these can be really good ways to make connections. Right, so next up is how you might go about conducting an ecological survey. Now, you might just want to make anecdotal observations and send in a few records, and that's absolutely fine and incredibly important. However, essentially, if you make enough observations and do it in a structured way, then you have yourself a survey. So surveys provide us with a systematic way of collecting data on species, habitats, and environmental conditions, and that can help for us to understand ecosystems and how best to manage habitats. Now, there are a multitude of formal ways to conduct surveys for numerous organisms. However, I thought I'd share a few sort of basic examples to give you an idea of what you might be able to do within your groups. But often any information on specific species and surveys is widely available, and I think we'll probably provide some links as well. So first up is a walkover survey, which is typically botanical focused, and it's one of the most widely used methods for monitoring wildlife and recording vegetation. So typically, recording vegetation gives you one of the better ways of identifying how diverse habitat is, as well as understanding its condition. So it can be as simple as selecting an area, such as a field or woodland, walking through it and recording as many species as well as any other biological information that he thinks useful. However, you can utilize more formal methodologies to gather a wider variety of data, and that can help you to begin to interpret habitat types, the condition of the area you're surveying, and other useful things. Now, I'm not going to go into specific examples of how you would conduct a woodland survey or a grassland survey, as they can take half a day, and often we run those in person. However, the key things to consider typically revolve around important features of the habitat you're observing. So, for example, within a woodland, you might want to separate your species list out into the canopy species, the understory, and the field layer. And you may want to take note of other features, such as the amount of deadwood that's present, the level of shading, as this can limit ground flora, and the presence of invasive species like rhododendron or Himalayan balsam, which might damage the habitat. Now, another common thing used across botanical surveys is positive and negative indicator species, and these are essentially organisms which are indicative of healthy or damaged ecosystems. Now, in grasslands, we're typically looking for a good variety of native wildflowers, and there's lists of these positive species available. And so in a lowland meadow, you might typically be looking at things like yellow rattle, knapweed, meadow vetchling, wild carrot, orchids. But alternatively, if you're in somewhere that's degraded or is showing signs of enrichment, then you might be looking at things like docks, nettles, white clover, perennial ryegrass, and other things. But what I would recommend is look at a few examples of survey methods and find one that makes sense to you. Just give it a go. Otherwise, you could contact local wildlife organisations to see if they have any resources. But I know Plant Life have quite a few good examples on rapid woodland assessments and grassland assessments. And the other thing that's worth considering is timings for your target areas, as for example, woodland surveys are typically conducted in the spring, whereas grasslands are done so in the summer. So they typically revolve around when most species will be present. But if you're really motivated, you can monitor the same area numerous times throughout the year to pick up a wider variety of organisms. So woodlands are a great example of this. You typically go out and do your botanical survey in the spring, but then you have a whole host of really interesting fungi present in the autumn and winter. So it's often worth repeating surveys. So next up is bird surveys. So I may have given it away with the amount I spoke about plants, but I'm predominantly a botanist, but bird surveys can be quite easy too. So one of the main bird surveys is a breeding bird survey, and that typically involves walking around a predetermined route and making notes of any calls or birds you observe at different points throughout that transect. And then you can also include things like their movements and other observations. However, if you're getting started, I think one of the best things to do is utilizing a simplifying point count. And this is essentially where you determine a series of points within your local area and spend an allotted amount of time, maybe 20 minutes, maybe more, recording birds at each location. Now, this is usually done in the morning. during the breeding season, as this is when birds are the most active. And this is between February and August in the UK. However, it's worth noting that you won't pick up things like nocturnal species or migratory species. So once again, you might want to repeat this. And unlike walkover surveys, these can be a lot more inclusive as you're not necessarily as reliant on mobility. So, for example, you could just allocate a load of points in people's gardens and then each person observe the species for 20 minutes. So similar to the RSPB's Garden Bird Watch, if you're familiar with it. Another thing I'd recommend is that it can be really useful to record sound at these points as well. So even if you've just got your phone, what you can do is if there's any calls that you're uncertain of and you have a particular whiz at identifying birds, you could always show it to them and see if they can help. But also you build up a library of sounds which you can refer back to. Then the next one is a BioBlitz. Now you might be familiar with it, but if not, essentially it's usually a single day or a weekend event whereby you encourage your community to get out and record as much as possible within a set area. Now, there's often more formal events set up by people like the Wildlife Trust, and they'll tend to invite experts to help run surveys and identify species, but there's absolutely no reason as to why you can't do that yourself. So try and pull together ID resources, find some knowledgeable people and just get out recording. You could conduct anything from a moth survey, a wildflower walk, a bird ID session, and you could do that all in one day. And this can be a really fantastic way of gathering baseline data for a community or a specific project, particularly in areas where there might not be any existing records. And it's also a really good way to engage people and get others involved. And it's just a fun way to interact with people and the natural world. So definitely keep an eye out for any of those events around you, as it can be useful to attend one first just to get an idea of how they run. Now, another one is a fit count. And these are an excellent and really easy survey to do. And they tend to gather data on pollinators and invertebrates. Essentially, all you do is create a 1/2 meter square of string, plonk it on top of a target plant, and then record every insect and pollinator that visits that plant within 10 minutes. So these can be done pretty much anywhere from fields, gardens, allotments, anywhere you think might be of interest. And you also don't need to be an expert, as they provide really simple methodology on their website and give you some really good ID resources to distinguish between bees, wasps, and flies. However, if you can identify something down to the species level as well, that's really good. But also be sure to submit your records to the project, but make note of them for your own community group as well. Now, this is slightly more technical, but I know community groups which have successfully mapped and recorded habitats within their local area, and you can do this in a variety of ways. So the best way, but also the most technical, would be using something called a geographic information system, which essentially is a bit of software that allows you to manage and edit data and create maps. And you could potentially use this, say, to map the hedgerows within your community. And then you can make notes of any gaps in connectivity between habitats that you might want to target in the future. Now, there's free bits of software such as QGIS, and you can also record on or create maps on things like Google Maps or Google Earth. But alternatively, you could always just utilize an image of a map, draw over it, annotate it, or worst case scenario, just get a bit of paper and a pen and sketch out a map of your area. So now utilizing your records and surveys. So now the records and surveys you conduct, they can be utilized in a multitude of ways to support nature within your community. So you might be able to identify areas which could be improved for wildlife, such as improving their connectivity. But you could also engage with local landowners to see if they could help support wildlife. You could also start working with NGOs or local governing bodies to support any ongoing projects that might be local to you. And you can support that by providing all the data that you've collected. And although I'm Devon based now, I'm originally from the Midlands, and there was a fantastic local group to me where I grew up called Cinch. And they're working directly now with their local parish council to advise them both on sustainability and green infrastructure within their local area, and they're making a really big difference through their actions. And you can definitely do that too. And finally, one other way to utilize your data is to share it. And I'll go on to some more detail about that now. So first things first is storing your data in an easily accessible format. So this can be done using something like an Excel sheet or even paper records. However, it's a lot easier to transfer digital records. You can now use apps like iNaturalist to set up projects where you might set a boundary for a local area, and it will then automatically collate any records within those areas. And these records do feed back to local record centres and other organisations. So maintaining these records within your community will also be incredibly useful for any local projects, as you can directly refer back to them. However, you can spread that knowledge further to support larger projects, and this will ultimately help influence decision making within the environmental sector. So data can be submitted to the DBRC online, either as individual records or via an online form, which we kind of offer a template which you can download. Otherwise, just email us or your other kind of local record centre. And if you've got any questions, we can help work out the best way to submit your data. And additionally, I think we're now setting up a habitat mapping tool where you can inform us on habitats local within your area. You could also submit your records to specific groups, such as Devon Birds or Devon Fungus Group. And finally, you can also upload records onto apps such as iNaturalist, which are publicly accessible. However, it is worth considering whether the species might be sensitive if it's endangered, which is where kind of not accessible data can be quite good for protecting species. Now, if you want to view data within your local area, then there are some really good online resources. So as I've mentioned before, iNaturalist is really good. There's also sites such as the NBN Atlas, which compiles open access data from record centres and other NGOs, and that can all be viewed for free. However, it is worth noting that a lot of that data can be commercially sensitive, so you might not be able to use it in any formal work. And you can also contact your local record centre regarding data searches, but I do have to note that we do charge for it. And that's to kind of pay for our time managing the records. However, if you do have any queries about that, then do feel free to email us. So now I've discussed recording and surveying, I thought it'd be a good idea just to highlight some projects that I've been working with. And this includes past projects and ongoing projects. And yeah, some of the work's really fantastic. So first up is Green Minds. If you're local to Plymouth, hopefully you know about it, but it ran between 2019 and 2023. And the Green Minds project really tried to encourage people to develop a green mindset, putting nature and wildlife at the heart of decision making within Plymouth and its green spaces. So this led to numerous wildlife records being created, both by individuals and groups within Plymouth. So this infographic has some of the stats. And that sort of helped to really vastly increase the amount of knowledge and data on the Plymouth area. The community-led effort also led to informing decisions regarding the management of parks and green spaces, which has helped to transfer fields into wildflower meadows. And the project also provided apprenticeships within the environmental sector for local people to develop skills and knowledge that then could be spread further and wider. And then one of the primary goals of the project was to engage people with nature, and therefore by providing online and in-person events, it was possible for people from all backgrounds to get involved. And that made kind of human connections as well as natural connections. And they still have a load of resources on their website, so I definitely recommend having a look. Next is Saving Devon's Treescapes, and that's a really fantastic project led by Devon Wildlife Trust, and it's still ongoing. And they're actively addressing the threat of ash decline resulting from dieback. It's expected that we'll lose about 90% of our ash trees, and that will have a massive impact on species that rely on ash, but trees in the landscape as a whole. So they've been working with communities and motivated individuals to survey and monitor wildlife that utilise both ash and the wider treescape. And this helps to build a better picture of the distribution and populations of species. Now, this includes species such as the brown hair-streaked butterfly, lichens, harvest mice, soil bunting, and bats. And they offer a wide variety of training and survey opportunities throughout the year. And they've also been monitoring and recording notable species throughout Devon using their Treescapes app. And anyone can get involved with this. Essentially, it's any tree that you deem to be notable, whether that's an ancient oak or a young tree of particular importance in your community. So yeah, definitely get involved with that and check out the work that they've been doing. And finally, I thought I'd just quickly talk about county wildlife sites and what the DBRC has been doing. So over the past 2 years, we've been working with 2 really fantastic groups. So Action for Climate in Teambridge and the Ashrahney and Riddlecombe Nature Recovery Group. And that is to identify county wildlife sites. Now, essentially, a county wildlife site is an area that's important for wildlife, but it's a non-statutory designation, unlike triple SI. So often these areas fall within private ownership, and therefore community connections can be really useful in identifying landowners. Now, although county wildlife sites are, well, yeah, they're somewhat of a designation, it doesn't prevent landowners from managing their land in any specific way. But what it does do is flag up any important areas in a planning scenario, but also helps us to build a better idea of the habitats and important species throughout Devon. Now, we conduct a lot of these surveys ourselves, but there's only 3 of us in the field team, so that's quite a lot of work. And our partner organisations also help out. But by incorporating community groups, we've been able to get more boots on the ground to survey more sites and get more areas designated. So to do this, we essentially ran some woodland and grassland training courses for communities, and that involved both plant ID and condition assessments. And then they were provided with a list of sites to survey and report back on. And they've managed to get multiple sites designated over the past 2 years. I think there was around 5 or 6 designated recently. And many of these groups have very little experience prior to this in surveying. But a lot of them now, the individual members are really competent botanists. And these kind of individuals have been really fantastic. And I'm sure you'll know similar people in your communities that are really knowledgeable and just keen to help out. So not only have these groups helped the County Wildlife Site Network and collect records, but they've also helped identify really important areas with their communities. Now, hopefully this has provided a good overview of how you can record and monitor wildlife, both individually, but as a community. And hopefully I've highlighted a few ways in which people from all different backgrounds and abilities can get involved. Really, it can have fantastic benefits for our well-being by connecting us with nature and other members within our community. But it also provides us with numerous opportunities to learn and develop vital skills to support nature. So I really can't emphasize enough how important a role communities can play in helping to conserve and monitor wildlife, as it helps nature at a local level, at a national level, but essentially at a global level as well. So yeah, thanks very much for listening. And yeah, if you do have any questions, I know we've got the Q&A, but if you want to email me as well, I'm sure we can provide that as well.
Great. Thank you so much, Jack. That was excellent. Really great. Really thorough as well. So thank you so much. And yeah, I hope everyone found that really useful. We're going to go straight over to Joe, and then we're going to go to your questions. We have seen the ones in the chat, so don't worry, we will get to those. So I'm just going to share my screen, Joe.
Okay.
And then we'll go over to you. Oops. Yeah. There we go. Is that all right?
Oh, yeah, thanks, Katie. That's great.
Yeah, perfect.
So yeah, I've come tonight to talk to you about Sustainable Hatherley, a community group, and we started, I don't know, maybe 6-7 years ago as a group of like-minded people who wanted to get together and do some work for wildlife, and we also had some people who were keen to do sort of environmental action within the town of Hatherley. And lots of people were doing bits and bobs on their own, but we wanted to come together under one umbrella. And we were really keen to sort of set a group up. Unfortunately, we got a bit scuppered by the whole COVID and being isolated. And so during that time, we sort of developed into a group that really worked off the back of Facebook and putting articles into our local magazine and newsletter in the town. When we started, we called ourselves Hatherley Environmental Forum, not Sustainable Hatherley, because we really wanted to be an informal group. None of us who wanted to do this sort of environmental work wanted to join yet another committee, and we didn't want to have another structure where we had to have constitutions and AGMs and so on. We just wanted to be a group of like-minded people with a very relaxed sort of attitude to our group. And over time, we've developed that and have recently relaunched ourselves as Sustainable Hatherley, and have now launched into a constitution, a group with a bank account, and have a formal committee. So over many years, we've developed that. And we've really done that so we can now progress and get some funding and some insurance behind us. Partly because the latest drive amongst the community was to open a repair cafe, and to do that we wanted to have a bit more structure and formality about the way we work. So we relaunched our name, and under the Sustainable Hatherley banner now we have obviously the wildlife work that we've been doing for many years. We've got the repair cafe launching this weekend coming, and we've also got some work going on to look at the energy within the town and maybe get some solar panels and so forth on some of our community buildings. So we've got this sort of overarching name now of Sustainable Hatherley, and it seems to be working really well. And we seem to be drawing more people in because of the broadening sort of remit that we're working under, which is actually very, very useful. So yeah, that's been great. So those of you who don't know where we are, if you just flick slides for me, Katie, you should be able to see a map of Devon. Hopefully there's enough detail there for you to work out. The big star in the middle is where Hatherley is. So we're about 7 miles north of Oakhampton and Dartmoor there, inland directly from Bude, probably about 20 miles, and south of Great Torrington. And when Jack shared his heat map earlier, you might have worked out that that area has very low levels of recording for species. And I'll touch on that again in a minute, perhaps. It's quite a low populated area, so I think that makes quite a difference as well to the number of records. But possibly some of us need to be a bit more enthusiastic about recording with DBRC. We were lucky enough to have a project called Conservation Communities for 2 years, run by Devon Wildlife Trust, and that was the parishes between Hatherley and Great Torrington. And the idea of that was to generate wildlife records to try and fill in that heat map a bit that Jack showed us from the DBRC, and the data, and try and boost some of the recording of species they had. So that's definitely helped us in our parish to get going on recording a few more things. So that's where we are, and we're a group of volunteers, as I say, under the new banner of Sustainable Hatherley. So what do we do? Katie, if you just want to flick to the next slide. We do a whole range of things. We do wildlife surveys, which I'll come on to in a second, but we also do some practical conservation tasks. This is some of our volunteers scything one of our roadside verges, and we do sort of annual cuts and rakes of the verges. There's 2 that we've adopted in town. We do some Himalayan balsam pulling when that's needed. Katie's probably got a slide there to show you. That was an area under some woodland that was very wet, and it was covered in balsam, and we decided just to get in touch with everybody very ad hoc and say, should we get this balsam pulled? And loads of people turned up, absolutely to our surprise that many people would turn up, and we cleared the area, and it made such a big difference. In fact, you know, we've only ever done it once since that one meeting where we seemed to strip the area, and it made such a big impact. and we knew that that area would spread because of it being a wet woodland. So we were worried also that it would get into the watercourse and go on to Hatherley Moor. We're very lucky in Hatherley. We've got a very large area of open access land called Hatherley Moor, and people are very, it's very important to the community, and we're very lucky to have that resource and the wildlife there. So quite a lot of our work is focused on that. So this was a corner of the moor where we didn't want the balsam to spread. So other work that we do quite a lot of promoting of wildlife events and activities, and we write articles for our local newsletter each month, and we spread news about other local wildlife things that are going on. We also, as I said earlier, are now launching a repair cafe and looking at some energy resilience within the community. So when it comes to surveys, which is what today's event is about, to tell you about some of the survey work we've done, there's really two types of survey that we do as a community. One is surveys from organisations, a call, if you like, from organisations. And there's lots of organisations that have been talked about already this evening. I just tried to come up with a few examples of things that we've been involved with. If you're looking to start surveying, and I remember at the beginning that survey said a lot of you weren't confident and you'd like to get started on surveys, I can highly recommend that you get in touch with an organisation that's already running surveys for communities. So a really great example is the Harvest Mouse project run by the Devon Mammal Group, and you go along to a training session. So they teach you how to survey for harvest mice. You spend a day or half a day learning the skills you need, and then you go off and work within your area or an area that suits you, and you go and look for harvest mice nests. It's a survey that's done in the winter, so you're not going to see any mice, you're only going to see the nests they used, and then you record that, and they put everybody's records anonymously, so you don't have to have your name there, but they put them up onto a map. So you can look at a map and say that area has been recorded, or there's been nothing seen this year. And so you can see right across the county where the records are. And it's quite a nice project to be involved with. And you can put as much or as little time as you want into your survey. So it's not something you're restricted to doing once, you don't have to go out every month. You don't have to go out in horrible weather. You can choose your time and so on. So that's a really lovely project. You're looking for one species, so it's not overly complex if you're not confident at identifying, and what you're looking for is a nest. So it's really quite a definite. If you find it, it's fairly obvious, and you can send a photo in and get it verified. So there's projects like that you can be involved with, and that's really how we got started in Hatherley as a group. We did Harvest Mice Training Day and learnt how to survey for those. We got involved with Life on the Verge project, which was run originally by the Tarka Country Trust, and they tied up with DBRC and ran botanical survey training sessions, and they taught people how to identify flowers that would occur in this area along the wildflower verges. And so we got involved with that as a community. Several people went on the training sessions, and we've used those skills time and time again that we learnt on that training session. One of the nice things they did was they identified some key species that they wanted recording, so then we could learn those species, and that really helped us again, because it can be a bit overwhelming to try and learn a lot of flowers and plants in one go. And then there's the pearl bordered fritillary surveys, which I think are still being run through the Devon Wildlife Trust tree project that was mentioned earlier. And then with that one, you get training session, and then you get dedicated a set grid reference to go and have a look at. So it's a little bit more structured, but again, the format is all there for you to join in with. We had, under the Conservation Communities Project, a hedgerow survey, which I believe is probably still available on the DBRC and Devon Wildlife Trust website. And again, there's some lovely resources that go with that, so you can identify the trees in the hedgerow in the winter time and look at the twigs to identify which are which. And you don't just survey for the plants, but you're surveying the structure of the hedge as well. So if your identification skills aren't great, you can still be creating a useful survey by doing some measuring and analysing what the hedge condition is like. There's things like the big butterfly count, and things like the Great Garden Survey for Birds by the RSPB. So there's some annual events that you can join in with, which are great surveys to get involved with. And we talked earlier about people doing surveys in their own garden. The bird survey is a perfect example of that, where people can sit in their own house having a hot cup of tea on a winter's day and count the number of birds over an hour or two at a weekend day. Other things that we have been involved with, and I'm not sure whether they're still going, is the Plant Life's lichen survey. Again, there was training provided. You'd go for an hour or two session and they would send you all the resources and you'd go out and have a look at some lichens in the woodland. And then one of our volunteers in our community has for several years now done, over the summer months, a river survey. It's called the Riverfly project, and that's, I believe, a national project where volunteers go out across all the watercourses around the country and they record on a 1 day a month the species that they find in the water. They do kick sampling. I don't know if anyone's ever done that, but you have a net and you basically kick up the sediment and the creatures get caught in the net, and you count how many there are of the different fly species. At the end, you pop all the species back in, and those results can show any early indications that the river quality is changing. So it's a very useful project. And I think one of the things to think about when you're doing something like that is that your project might be just a really tiny amount that you're doing, but when you put it together as a collective across the county or across the country, you suddenly realise there's quite a high impact, and all the collective results make quite a big difference to what we know about the health of the rivers, or whether the harvest mice populations are increasing or decreasing and things like that. So even if you can only spend a short period of time doing a survey, it can have a big impact when you put it together with everybody else's. So that's kind of one type of survey, the call from the organisations, and we've definitely got involved with that within our community, and we really enjoy doing those because you often get resources and training, which it gives you confidence to go out and have a go. And then the other types of surveys that we've done are things that have been useful for us. So we talked earlier about baseline information, and one of the things we find really useful in Hatherley was to get some baseline data. For example, we have an area of Hatherley Moor where we have got some bird boxes, and every year our volunteers go out and they survey and do a bird species count, nesting birds. And as a result of that baseline information, they can then decide whether they want to perhaps look for other species or try and encourage other species to go there. So this is our brilliant volunteer who drove this part of the project. He got loads of bird boxes made up. I think he actually got them made up from volunteers at the Dartmoor prison as a project that they had running there, and then they put them all up across Hatherley Moor for us. And then he had somewhere to go and survey, and he checks the boxes every year. And we haven't just got the classic bird box, we've got things like this tree creeper box, we've got kestrel boxes, owl boxes, so a complete mix of different bird boxes, which gives us an opportunity to see what's nesting there. So that's just an example of where a baseline survey was useful, because then we could start expanding and looking and how things change over the years. And then we've done things like monitoring changes. So Katie, if you just flick slides again. So some of our changes that we've made have been as a result of our survey. So this is volunteers doing a botanical survey on a roadside verge. Again, skills that we learnt through Life on the Verge project. And you just take a walk along the verge and record the flowering plants. And if you know some of the species of grass, you can record those too. And then because of that, you can see whether your management that you're doing on your roadside verge or a piece of grassland has changed over years. So if you start off with a survey at the beginning before you start changing the management, and then you change what you do or you start managing that verge to try and increase the number of species on it, then you can record each year, or you can record every 2 or 3 years, and see if the species numbers are going up. Or you might be deciding that you're not going for the number of species, but you want to particularly look after one species. So we have a verge that has got lots of early purple orchids, which is what attracted it to become a looked after verge for wildlife in the first place. And so as a result of recording the number of orchids and the other plants around it, we were able to say to the county, can you leave this site for a bit longer before you cut it, with the contractors. And they've accepted that now as a site that the contractors will leave every year, and they'll cut it at the end of the season, you know, August, September, something like that. And then the volunteers, which is us, go along and rake it and remove all the cuttings. So by having those records, it allowed us to make some changes to the way that site was looked after. So monitoring is very useful from that point of view. But if you don't have the surveys in the first place, then obviously you can't necessarily monitor those changes so well or make suggestions. And then the other really useful thing is with our surveys is that it does inform some of the decisions we might make. So Katie, if you go to the next slide, you see this is a group of volunteers in our local churchyard. And for 4 years now, we have left some areas of the churchyard to go to sort of wildflowers. And we have an annual cut where contractors come and cut the grass in September, and all the volunteers then come along and rake up all the hay, and we compost it down, or we send it to a local farm. Anyway, so when we first decided to leave the churchyard to go to wildflowers, we had no idea what would come up. Nobody knew what would grow because it had always been cut and mown every few weeks throughout the summer. So the first year we did it after a consultation with the community, we monitored what was growing there, and we found some lovely plants, and it made a real focal point for the community when we talked about the number of flowering plants. There were some people who didn't really want the grass left long, and they certainly didn't want it left long once the flowers had finished, but we knew that we had to leave it for the seeds to set. So there was this whole sort of month at the end of the flowering season, maybe 6 weeks, when it sort of starts to look a bit sad and not quite so pretty, and the community aren't quite so keen. So by us being able to say, look, we've got this number of flowering plants, and we will be monitoring it to see whether it increases in flowering plants over the years, and we can look at the butterflies that are there. And so communicating with the community was really, really important. And it was really nice to be able to have some facts and figures to put behind that communication about the number of flowers or the types of flowers, or we could put messages out if we saw something new or different. And one of the things on the back of that was last summer, we discovered that we had quite a significant population of marble white butterflies for the first time. So that was year 3/4 of leaving the grass long. So that was really nice to be able to say to the community, look, we're actually getting different species now. And so on the back of that discovery about the marble whites, we've actually left over the winter a couple of areas uncut to help the overwintering caterpillars and to help them next spring. So we will cut those areas next year because we don't want scrub to come in, and we don't want the area to change significantly. It's still our graveyard, and we still want it to be grassland. So we'll leave another patch, a different area, the subsequent years after that, and do a rotation. So the idea is that we are adapting our management very slightly and trying to accommodate some additional areas for different wildlife. Now, in both those cases, both the organisational records and our own records, we do try to send them in to Devon Biodiversity Records Centre. Now, usually the Devon organisations will already have links with the Records Centre, so you only need to submit your records to those organisations and they'll pass them on. Not all of them will, but most of them do, and there's usually brilliant links between them. I can hand on heart say that we haven't recorded all of our records from our community to DBRC, but during the Conservation Communities project we were definitely better at doing that, And I think the community became better and realised that it was really important. And at the end of the project, we had those species used to write a biodiversity audit for the parish. So we now have a really useful document to build on for the work that we do. So who's involved? Well, we've involved all sorts of people over the years. Katie, if you want to flick slides. We've obviously, we're all volunteers, the people who come forward, and you know, every now and then I get a phone call or someone connects me with someone and says, oh, such and such wants to do this survey that they've heard about. And it could be someone I've never heard of, completely new to the community, or someone who's been around for years who wants to get involved. I had a phone call recently from a lady who's just done the otter spotters training, which again is linked with Devon Biodiversity Records Centre. And she just said to me, I'm going to be doing this because it's really exciting to me and I love the otters, and I should let you know that I'm doing it. And if you know of any otters in the area, which we know we've got, she said, oh, could you let me have any past records that you happen to have? So there's always things coming up that people get involved with. But one of the things we did, and we have done over the years, but especially last year, was work with the school. So one of the teachers got in touch with me from the school and said, there's a project called God's Acre, I think it was called. And she said, we'd like the children to come up to the churchyard and record the wildlife in that churchyard. So we said, yeah, we'll help. And we borrowed the equipment that was talked about earlier from Devon Wildlife Trust. So that was the sweep nets and the pots and the identification charts. And we went to the churchyard, and during the day, the children came up, each class came up and had a go at having a go at sweep netting and making records. And we obviously didn't record everything down to species level, but we were able to talk about the different species, and the children were able to visually see that they all had different species or different types of spiders, and so on. So it was that idea that we're showing them there's a broad range of species, and they were starting to get really into the finding something different, finding something new. And if you ever want to go and do an insect survey or mini beasts or bug hunts or whatever you want to call them, take children. They're brilliant at finding things, much better than adults, I think. So yeah, get a class full of kids and do a bug survey, and you'll have a huge number of records. And then as a spin-off, not as a spin-off from that, in addition to that, we like to work and do events in Hatherley that bring in the people of the town and get them involved in our wildlife. And what we've done is tie up with Hatherley Festival. So we're lucky enough to have a big event every year in our town called Hatherley Festival, and we've sort of jumped on the bandwagon of that. And so we always have a wildlife element to that festival, and people expect it now. We've done it for several years and it's become a bit of a thing, and they look out for it in the programme. And this year we repeated the bug hunt that we did with the children. We used all the equipment from Devon Wildlife Trust, and we did sweep netting and bug hunting in the churchyard. Luckily the churchyard is right next to the festival site on the square, so we didn't have to drag people away from the entertainment. We were part of the entertainment. So we basically took wildlife to the people. But what was so fantastic was that the children came in their droves with their parents, and they showed their parents how to bug hunt. We really just provided the equipment and the location. And it was fantastic because the children knew what to do. They just came, they drifted in and out throughout the day. We had hundreds and hundreds of kids and parents, and they absolutely loved it. And again, we didn't overstress about the name of every species. We took some photos and we tried to do our best. But what happened was, and this is an absolute classic that Katie was talking about earlier, a chap who lives even in the same road as me that I didn't even know about turned up and said, I've been an entomologist all my working life. I've worked overseas, I've worked everywhere. I'm a professor, and would you like some help with identifying some of the creatures that the kids find? And I was just blown away that this person came out of nowhere prepared to help. So from now on, we now have our own expert in our town who we will be tapping into his knowledge for sure every time we do something like this. So that was just brilliant. So yes, there are hidden experts in your community, and I've lived here for a long time and had no idea that he was there. So Katie, I don't know if you want to flick slides. I think there's a picture, hopefully, of people bugging. There's the kids out and in the churchyard with their parents, teaching them how to bug hunt, running around trying to find as many different things as they could. And Hetty asked me if I could just talk to you about some of the challenges. There's definitely challenges. Katie, I don't know if you want to flick to the next slide. I think the biggest challenge I could think of was time. We're volunteers. We do this work because we're passionate, and it's sociable. That's why we love doing it as a group, and we can just ask people if they want to come and help. But I think our biggest challenge is the amount of time we have. And we all love going out and doing the surveys, and we all love being out. But what we're not so keen on is doing the admin and the risk assessments and the paperwork that goes behind it. So again, if you can tap into an organisation that's running these surveys, you will get a risk assessment provided for you. You will probably get insurance to cover you. You will certainly get a lot of support with the admin that takes a long time. And is time consuming. So again, if there's a group of you, it helps you to stay on top of the admin because it gives you the motivation. It definitely helps keep you motivated and on all of those tasks. And it feels like there's quite a good purpose to it if there's a few of you doing it. Finding new volunteers can be tricky. And quite often you can start off with a few very enthusiastic people that either start to get a little bit old and they can't do what they used to do, or their commitments their time gets pulled elsewhere and their commitments changed, and so they're not available anymore to do what they were originally doing. And I think that's probably the biggest problem we've had as a community, is keeping that momentum going. But as I say, we've recently opened our repair cafe, and we've within a few months got a whole new range of volunteers, and I think we will be supporting each other with all our different hats on, and I think that will really help. So it's definitely worth starting small and growing, and hopefully as individuals you'll gather momentum if you can find people to help you as you go. So I think that's what I've got to say on Hatherley, a sustainable Hatherley.
Brilliant. Thank you ever so much, Joe. As you can tell, both Joe and Jack have a wealth of experience. So yeah, really great to have you tonight, going over your experiences and yeah, telling us what you've been up to as well. There are some questions. So Hetty, did you want to read those out?
Yeah, absolutely. Let's dive in. So aware, obviously, we're at the time. So please do keep submitting your questions, and if we don't get round to them, we can always follow up those in the end in the email. But the first question then is for Jack, which is, would you be able to say roughly, if you know, how much the cost might be to get a baseline data survey for a small parish?
I think our standard rate is around £50 for community groups. So that would be for our data search. But yeah, I think I have to double check on the website.
Great, thank you. And then one for Joe, which is, do you know if there are any similar groups to yours in Oakhampton? And if not, do you have any advice for establishing one?
Yes, there's definitely groups in Oakhampton. Oakhampton do something called Green Drinks. I think it's the first Wednesday of every month. And I think you can probably search that on, there's definitely a Facebook announcement every month about that. And within that group, the idea of their Green Drinks is that people get together again very casually and they chat about different projects going on. And last time I went along, there was someone who's doing hedgehog work, surveying, but there's also people with an ecological sort of and environmental projects going on. There's quite a few initiatives in Oakhampton, and I would start there if you want to get something up and running in Oakhampton. We've also got an event coming up in Oakhampton if you want to come along to that, called World About Devon Community Forum, and that would be a great event if you wanted to come along. That's on February the 3rd. We can put some details up about that, couldn't we, potentially, for anyone who wants to come along?
Yeah, we'll send some details about that in the follow-up email. Yeah, that's a joint event with World About Devon, Devon Wildlife Trust and Community Action Groups Devon. So and there's loads of time to network with lots of other community groups, so definitely worth one going along to. Just to say, I think there are some more questions. I know we're running over, so just bear with us, probably another 10 minutes if you can just hold on, everyone. And yeah, thank you for sticking with us. Hetty, have you got a couple more questions?
Yep, so another one, I suppose, more for Jack. So I'm keen to protect a small private nature reserve around my home. It's very rich in wildlife, everything from glowworms to beavers and bats. Wow, sounds great. But it's not protected by any designations. Will sending in records to you help to protect it when I have to sell?
Yeah, so any records sent in for protected species will be flagged if there were to be any development going on there. So they would have to do a data search, and if we hold those records, then they'll be flagged up. The other thing to do is, depending on the size of an area, you could also look to see if it would be suitable as a county wildlife site. So typically it would be an area of land over half a hectare, and usually it's based around priority habitat. So whether it's kind of good example of a lowland meadow or deciduous woodland, but in some cases, I know this year we did designate a small site based off of criteria for reptiles and mammals. So if there's enough records on a site, then it can be designated as a county wildlife site under other criteria. But if it's a sort of decent area or decent size, then you could always email one of us, the DBRC. So all our contact information is on our website. Yeah, so hopefully that answers it.
Great, thanks, Jack. And then a follow-up question, I suppose, to that is, does a county wildlife site designation mean that it can prevent planning permission necessarily?
It will be taken into consideration. I'm not sure to the extent whether it will prevent it, but it certainly adds weight to a site and can make it more difficult, or at least they have to count for whatever's happening.
Brilliant. And I think the final question was just around the iNaturalist app and whether that feeds into DBRC, but I think you already answered that one, and that was true. Is that correct?
Yeah, so the records do get back to us, but it can be quite slow. Similar with recording groups, so we tend to have really good connections with them. So as Joe was saying, if you do submit them to recording groups as well, they will also feed back to us. So you don't need to send all your data sets to different people.
Brilliant. I think that's all the questions. If you do think of anything else after the session, do feel free to email into us. I'll send all of the relevant links and everything. But yeah, back to you, Katie.
Brilliant. Thanks, Hetty, and thanks for all your questions, everyone. So just quickly before we start to finish up, Joe actually wanted to just highlight the local nature recovery strategy that's coming in this year with her different hat on. She has multiple hats. So take one off and put another one on, Joe. Obviously, we are a bit tight on time, so perhaps you could just sort of summarise, Joe, about the local nature recovery strategy and how communities can get involved with it.
Yeah, okay. So local nature recovery strategy is something that's happening across the whole of the country, and we in Devon are obviously putting one together. It's a statutory requirement by the government, so therefore it's funded by DEFRA, and there's a big chunk of money to bring all of the experts' knowledge together across Devon. And at the moment, all of our experts are beavering away really hard to pull all the data, to work out which species and habitats will be a priority for Devon, and what actions need to be taken to protect those into the future. So there's a huge piece of work going on behind the scenes as we talk. The idea is that this becomes published in the summer, this summer. So it's happening very quickly. And once it's published, it'll be on a website that everybody will be able to access. And I mean, we are working with farmers and schools and community groups. We're working with experts, and eventually we want this information to be able to be accessed by parish councils, community groups, individuals who want to do things to protect the species in Devon. And it's going to be very specific to the species of your area as well. So we're going to put all this information together. We are looking for people in communities who want to sit on a group to make sure that the information we talk about is relevant to those communities, because it's very easy for experts to talk in a way that actually doesn't necessarily communicate well with the local communities or the schools or the farmers. So it's got to be, this document has to be usable by everybody. That's one of its requirements. So it's going to hold a huge amount of information. It's going to be very useful for us community groups because it'll shape what we do. It'll help us to focus on what to record, and it'll just show how important all our recording is, because we'll be able to monitor the changes and what improvements we can make as communities once this information is out there. So on the back end of this being produced, I think we all need to be looking at it. It'll probably shape funding for the next 10 years or so. It'll certainly shape which way our parish councils will look at wildlife. And I think for all of us working on the ground and all the charities that work in conservation, it will shape the work we do going into the future. So it's a very exciting piece of work. Now, if you want to be on a little support focus group to help make sure the information that gets published for communities is relevant and useful, do get in touch with me. So I'm working with Bridie, who's in South Devon, and then I'm working in the North Devon area, but we're covering the whole of the county. So there's 2 email addresses there, one for Bridie and one for myself. So feel free to email either of us and say if you'd like to get involved with our little sort of focus group. If you want to find out more about the LNRS, please go to the website, which at the moment obviously doesn't have a lot of information because it's all happening behind the scenes, but there's a lovely 3-minute video that will explain an introduction to what the LNRS is. And so if you go to the, and this is lots of acronyms, I'm really sorry, the Devon LNP, so that's the Local Nature Partnership website, which you can see there. You'll see a link then through to some introductions about the LNRS. Oh, I'm sorry about all those letters. That's terrible, isn't it? We're going to get in a right muddle. So I hope that makes sense. And sorry, that's really fast.
No, that's great, Jo. And as we mentioned earlier, we do have an event on the 3rd of February. Jo will be there talking more about the local nature recovery strategy. You know, it's a free event, so you know, please do come along to that if you want to find out more about wider communities work, LNRS, and also the work of Communities Actions Groups Devon, and to network with one another as well. Maybe even make friends. So yes, excellent. Thank you for highlighting that, Jo. And like Jo said, it's a big piece of work, and it's a pivot point. So you know, this could really influence the next decade or so. So yeah, a really important piece of work happening. Right, I'm just going to quickly share my screen one more time for the evening. I think my presentation is still up. The joys of Zoom. Is it that one? I'm not sure it is. No. Bear with me. There it is. Don't think it's sharing it though. Hold on. Is that it? No, I can't seem to find it. For some reason, it's not showing me it. So just to say really that there's another poll question that we just want you to fill out now that you've gone through the webinar session tonight. So we'd like to know, do you now feel more able, inspired and confident to start surveying and monitoring wildlife in your community? fingers crossed you feel at least a little bit more inspired and confident. So just see what the poll says. Great. So yeah, quite a few of you are saying a lot more able, inspired and confident, and a few of you are saying a little more. So that's great. That's exactly what we want to see. So I'm really glad that that has been really helpful. As Hetty said in the chat or earlier, we will be sending out a link to the YouTube video so you can watch this webinar as many times as you like, share it. She'll also send out in that email, there'll be all the resources that we've talked about tonight and contact details as well. So please do get in contact with any of us. So Wilder Communities team, Jack at DBRC, and Jo at Sustainable Hatherley, or as with her other hat on as local nature recovery strategy person. So yes, thank you ever so much, everyone. Just as you leave, there will be a quick feedback form. We'd really appreciate your feedback so that we can keep on improving these webinar sessions. But I shall let you go. Thank you, everyone, and thanks for sticking with us. And thanks to Jo and Jack. Brilliant.